Welcome to Behind the Build. I'm your host, Jonathan Jacobs. And today I have with me Rick Galezowski of Great Lake Studio. Before we get into today's episode, powered by Walden Homes, I want to speak to you about one of our brand new sponsors of the podcast, and that is Kaplan's Appliances. And yeah, we have a sponsor. It's a family-owned and operated business in Toronto, Canada for over 80 years. And Kaplan's Appliances is in its third generation of ownership. We at Walden have been working with them for 20 years. And over those 20 years, they've serviced our clients exceptionally, be it from the sales straight through the full cycle directly into service. And in keeping with the theme of generations, well, they have generational buyers. And why is it? It's because of their expertise and their knowledge on premium brands like Sub-Zero, Wolf, Miele, Genair, Fisher Pickel, and more. On the outdoor experience, Lynx and Kalamazoo. What they really look for is to curate the right type of experience for you as an architect or a designer, and how that translates for your clients. They actually have this amazing in-store program with an in-house chef that will prepare meals for all of you on the appliances that you are probably going to want to have inside that beautiful home. If you're interested in learning more about them, please email me. My email address is Jonathan, that's JONATHAN @waldenhomes.ca, and I will connect you with one of their managers. We're doing it this way because clients have come to you for who you are, the experience that you deliver, the process that you deliver. And when you meet with the manager, well, they're going to understand what you're looking for in the experience for your clients. And through that introduction, you'll be introduced to the right rep that will speak your language. With all of that said, I look forward to making these introductions to you and Kaplan's Appliances. But also, I want to introduce you to today's episode. So without further ado, here it is. Rick, thanks for coming.
Great to be here. Thank you.
I have spoken with you on and off over the last few years. We talked about a project once through Walden, talked to Maggie, your wife, over the years, and talked about your studio. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come over here and talk about everything. I had some lunch. It was delicious.
Absolutely delicious. Thank you. My pleasure.
I've learned about you over the years, but I've learned a little bit more about you over lunch. So I wanted to start off talking with you, as you do with most people, about early inspiration in your career, understanding that you've had a studio now for a number of years, and the road to getting there, and what did it look like for you early on?
Early on, okay. So, that's kind of an easy topic for me to talk about, because I feel like I've always aspired to be an architect before I had any idea what that was or what the term meant. And I say that in the sense that even from a very young age, 5, 6 years old, I was always interested in imagining and building environments of my own, and just getting lost in a world of my own creation.
So are you building forts?
Yeah, so when I was very young, my folks moved from Don Mills to central Etobicoke, sort of at the north end of the Kingsway near Kipling.
Oh, that's a transition across the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a completely new area. The house that they moved into was built in the 60s, so it wasn't like brand new. But across from us, there was sort of an anomalous parcel of land. It was a whole city block, like a suburban block,
yeah,
with a cul-de-sac that one day would appear in it, like a big area. And it was a remnant of farmland that just hadn't been purchased or developed by someone yet, whereas the whole rest of the neighborhood had been developed.
Right.
And so this was an anomaly. I can't think of anything else that was nearby. But that became my playground growing up.
Oh, amazing.
And it was incredible. And so when I say it was farmland, it was partly farmland, but a lot of it was also forested.
Okay.
The original, not original, but a slice of forest that existed before any
Yeah.
of this, any of the houses were built.
And was the city maintaining the land at all? Like, was it just like running wild?
It was just wild.
Okay.
And occasionally sheets of plywood would show up, probably discarded from a job site somewhere, and bits of lumber and carpet. I remember just things like this would kind of appear, presumably just dumped there by someone who didn't want it.
Yep.
But I started building forts, in the bushes, in the trees, sometimes underground. In the field, there were these deep holes in some areas of the field that I would cover over with 2x and carpet.
Yeah.
And just started to, I still remember them. I can still remember sitting in some of these things, and I remember the feeling of that, And yeah, that impulse sort of evolved into new mediums as I got a bit older. Lego.
Yep.
Which is it embarrassing to admit that I still play with Lego?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
I'm still doing it with my daughter.
I still do.
Yeah.
With my son.
Yeah.
Yeah. We get down on the floor together, and we have an ocean of Lego at home. Just unbelievable. And I get down on the floor and we make stuff, and there's just this warm nostalgia, in doing that with him.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. And, but I did lots of that again. I would just do it for days and days. My parents would worry about me, why don't you go outside and play with some friends? But I just wanted to play with Lego.
Yeah.
And in high school, I started painting a little bit, and always subject matter was always scenes of kind of, imagined urban landscapes and involving buildings, always about atmosphere, usually exploring atmosphere, certain kinds of lighting.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did for fun, all the way through from the early days up to high school. At some point, I suppose, probably in high school, I became aware of this whole idea that there's a profession out there called architecture, and you could become one of these architects and continue to do this as a vocation.
Yeah.
And so, of course, that's what I was going to do. There was never any question. I never considered ever anything else, doing anything else, and didn't cross my mind. And so at the end of high school, I applied to the University of Waterloo's architecture program, which is where I wanted to go. And I didn't get in. I was rejected.
You and Drew.
Yes. Yeah, we both have stories about this. So, I had the enthusiasm, I had the work, I had the portfolio to show, but I did not have the grades. I was just a little bit adrift through high school. I hated high school. I didn't see the purpose of high school.
I already know what I want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know this. Can we fast track this?
A little short-sighted, though, not to get the grades. And incredulous, I phoned the school and managed to speak with Rick Holnaby, who was the director at the time and is still very much involved in the school program at Waterloo. Mm-hmm. And I demanded an interview. And the poor guy, And so Rick is a charming, gracious guy, and he invited me in for a half-hour meeting. And I brought all my stuff, and I talked about everything, and I'm sure that he was convinced that this was what I wanted to do. And he said, let me look into it. And then about a week later, I received a letter from him, which I still have, and which was probably penned the moment I left. And it just said, thank you for coming, and I admire your enthusiasm, et cetera, but it's just a little too far along in the process right now. And he recommended that I enroll in a university program and reapply next year. So, undaunted, that's what I did. I did a year of general science at Waterloo. I took courses like organic chemistry and applied physics and a whole bunch of stuff that was of extremely limited interest to me, balanced out with not without some interest, but not a lot of interest.
Well, not the same.
Not the same at all.
Yeah.
And balance that out with, some kind of electives in fine arts, painting and drawing courses to sort of keep me happy. But I just buckled down for a year and worked my butt off and got the best grades that I'd ever had in school, and which got me in the door for an interview the next year. And once again, brought all my stuff, my paintings, models that I had built, all of it, and just talked and talked and talked. And I knew very quickly that I would be accepted.
You had followed the course that was provided to you. Go and apply, and then come back.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You
listened.
Yeah, I mean, I had no alternative. I wasn't going to change course. There was nothing else that I was going to do. I was going to go to architecture school, and I wanted to go to Waterloo. I wanted to go to Waterloo.
Waterloo, yeah.
And once I got there, I mean, Waterloo was a revelation to me. Here was a program with a curriculum that required me to do all the things that I just loved to do the most. It was like a beautiful spring day, and I tapped into a deep vein of solid gold, just like it was pure sublimation, just all this stuff just pouring out onto the pages. Loved it. I just loved architecture school. It brought me to life in a way that nothing else had prior to then.
And at that stage of school, were you in the same class, or were within the same couple of years of some of the others in the city? It's like Drew and
many
Drew and Robert and Kathy and Paul and
Drew and Robert were classmates of mine, and we lived together a number of times. I mean, there are so many great architects that came out of that class and out of Waterloo. I mean, not just our class, but there are too many really to name here, but many other architects would be familiar with because they're leading practices.
Yeah.
Others are, leading the charge in the things that they're doing. I mean, I have friends who are instrumental to all the transit work that's happening in the city right now. They're leading that.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a couple of good friends who are partners now at MGMA and providing the city with incredible rec centers, and so, amazed, not necessarily surprised though, but just amazed at the success and impact that so many of my classmates have had on the city.
Which is interesting because you say that, and at the same time also said that you did not enjoy high school quite as much. I feel like the social connectivity to the people at Waterloo versus those that were in many ways similar to what you had experienced, which were adrift in some way in high school. You're with like-minded people at Waterloo.
For sure.
Right?
I think that's probably a common experience that people have in university, where suddenly you're not just spending all your time with people who happen to, live proximate to you, but you're immersed in an intensive program with people who are all striving toward the same thing, who have similar passions. And on top of that, Waterloo at the time was kind of unique in its isolation. The studio was this very utilitarian building, nothing particularly charming about it, and just kind of buried off to the side of the campus. Waterloo itself, there wasn't much to do there. There were a couple of bars. There was a bowling alley. We'd go bowling sometimes. There wasn't much to do, right? So there'd be a lot of house parties.
Right.
And, who goes to the house parties? Well, all the architects. And there was a real bonded community there that came out of that. So I think it drove some people a little bit crazy. Maybe it was too insular for some people, but I quite enjoyed that.
Okay. And they have a program that's a co-op program.
Yes.
So where did you end up doing your co-op?
Yeah, the co-op program is fantastic, continues to be fantastic. My first couple of experiences were with KPMB,
okay,
as with so many others, in the city. And co-op took me to Berlin for a year.
Amazing.
Which was in 1992. So just on the heels of reunification and the Berlin Wall coming down.
Yeah.
There were a lot of other foreigners working in Berlin at the time on the working on redeveloping many of the war-damaged sites and on the actual physical reconstruction of the, can't remember the names of the buildings now. They're just at the tip of my tongue, but all of the old Parliament buildings, many of the art galleries. I mean, the whole city was really still in 1992, when I spent a year there, the evidence of all the trauma it had been through was very apparent.
Right.
Very apparent. And so there was a huge effort underway to kind of build it back up.
Yeah. What were you there in what capacity and where?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny story. There's a Japanese architect named Shin Takamatsu who had sort of a moment in the late 80s, early 90s. And he set up a satellite office in Berlin along with a local architect and somehow ended up hiring a whole bunch of Canadians. And I don't know how that came about, but there was a Japanese guy there who was kind of running the show from Shin's office. And they kept bringing over these Canadian co-op students. They had a senior fellow who was a graduate who was leading most of the projects and also Canadian. And then a handful of students. We all lived together in this little attic apartment in Kreuzberg, which was pretty cool. And, Berlin at the time was a fun place to be.
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Right? They're finally alive and finding itself. Right?
Yeah. And at the beginning of a huge transformation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very exciting. So that was fun. And then on the heels of that was the Rome program.
Okay. Well, before we get to Rome, so what did the projects look like that you were a part of while you were working in Berlin?
I haven't been back since. I would love to see them. I was working, before starting Great Lakes Studio, I was working in the Middle East for a while and traveling over there often. And when I was doing that, I would take little side trips, either on my way there or on my way home to Paris, Morocco, Jordan, just to kind of make the most of that travel time. And right before I left that office, I had planned a trip back to Berlin, and then it didn't happen. Yeah. So, but I worked on stuff in Potsdamer Platz, which is all built now. I've seen some images in magazines, but nothing in person.
And were they commercial projects or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And okay. So sorry. So from there, you moved away from Berlin.
Yeah, I went to Rome.
Yeah.
You probably know Waterloo had and still has a Rome program, right? In fourth year, everybody goes to Rome for 4 months, which is a whole other fantastic time.
A journey.
A journey. Yeah, it's another journey. But I don't have too much to say about it. I mean, there's almost too much to say.
Yeah.
And then, thesis after that and then graduation.
And so you graduated from school?
Yep.
Did you at this point, this is when you started back at KPMB, or did you go now out on your own? Or what did that look like when you graduated? That should be the question instead of trying to assume what you did.
No, I had a very good friend, John Potter, who you might know because everybody knows John Potter. He's an architect, and he was working with John and Marty at Kohn Shnier, and he encouraged me to come and work with those guys. And so, as it happened, they were just beginning a submission for an open national competition for a new student center at UTM, formerly Arundel College. And so the deal was that I would help them on this for free, and we'd split the prize money if we won. And it was tons of fun. The atmosphere in the studio, collaborative and a little bit, I would describe it as being experimental, maybe in the sense that, no idea was, not worth discussing or considering.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys, John and Marty, when I say those guys, they take a pretty bold approach to their projects, and their projects are highly conceptual, in the sense that they're out of the functional planning will come some very bold, simple but bold idea that then gets rigorously applied to every aspect of the project. And because of that, there's a nice clarity about their projects, whether it be some kind of an undulating roof that has, pockets of program underneath that, or a vacuum formed plastic panel that's reproduced 10,000 times and covers over an entire building. Their projects tend to be almost ruthlessly single-minded in their conceptual clarity,
Mm-hmm.
and which I liked very much. And I aspire to try and carry some of that attitude still forward in my work in a slightly different way. But anyway, they won that job. Yeah, fantastic. They won the job. National competition.
My hand just went up in the air.
Which was super exciting for myself and for the whole office. That it was a big moment in that office too. They were a kind of small, still just kind of getting off the ground office,
Mm-hmm.
and that winning that competition sort of ushered them into a new phase of their career. And there were great people there at the time, like all fresh out of school.
Right.
Tanya Bortolato was there, who I'm sure you know. Paul Raff was there, who you've interviewed here.
Yeah.
John Potter. I mean, lots of others. Maggie, of course.
Yeah.
I have to mention Maggie.
Was Tim Wickens there at the time, or no?
Tim Wickens? No.
That was later.
No, not when I was there.
Okay.
And of course Maggie, who my partner Maggie, I met there at Kohn Shnier. And I worked there for about 5 years. They gave me a lot of good opportunities there, running jobs, and I was involved in some houses, and of course the student center at UTM. And so it was a period of pretty intense growth professionally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was my time at Kohn Shnier. And then the whole bicycle travel obsession began to kind of derail what otherwise might have been a very nice straight line of a career.
For those that are wondering what that means, we're about to probably get into it. And I could tell you that this is, for me, this was one of the areas where I had connected initially with Maggie about, and then subsequently, talking about it with her and now you over lunch, and what that meant just for your own personal wealth.
Yeah, personal wealth.
Right. And your ability to, because what you've described so far is a person that is very keen on wanting to understand what the world looks like beyond the bubble of what our community or our city is. I mean, that's at least so far what I've taken away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose there's truth in that.
Berlin, Rome, and then you talk about traveling through the Middle East and seeing other areas in and around that. Like, it doesn't seem like you are wanting to just put down roots and stop seeing the world, and there are people that are like that. So, so let's talk about this, because this is a very interesting part of your life.
Sure. Yeah, definitely a wonderful time in life. So, and part of a commitment to just exploring the world that has been with us and that we continue to pursue our whole lives, which started, a long time ago with just canoe tripping, and like nothing out of line with what many people do when they are, go on a canoe trip, kind of similar types of trips for a similar duration with friends. But while I was at Kohn Shnier, I started to get interested in the possibility of traveling by bicycle with a tent and sleeping bag and clothes and a stove. So, like, just doing it all on my own, having what I needed to be independent. And I tried a few trips. I did a trip up the western coast of Newfoundland that was 3 weeks long, and just loved that so much. Beautiful, beautiful landscapes.
Mhm.
And I had the freedom to be able to go wherever I wanted, at a pace where you could really absorb everything you were seeing.
Right.
You're in it, you can smell it,
Yeah.
taste it, you're feeling it, feeling the wind,
Yeah.
and at 25 kilometers an hour, which is enough to actually go quite a long way in a day. You can travel 100 kilometers in a day and be in a totally different place, and 100 kilometers the next day and the next day. And in 10 days, you've traveled 1,000 kilometers on your bicycle, right? So,
I have to interrupt just to say one thing.
yeah.
If anyone out there is currently into cycling and you are looking at your cadence and you're aware of your speed, you are also aware that traveling anything over, I would say, 25 kilometers an hour, 25 kilometers an hour is a good pace. You get over 30 and you're starting to get into pretty quick territory. But to travel at 25 kilometers an hour with a tent, with a stove, with a sleeping bag, with clothes, with some form of food, that is a quick pace.
Well, okay, so we weren't always going 25.
Yeah, well, obviously, but still, but that's a moving pace.
We like to ride about 100 kilometers a day,
Right.
And that could be done in 5 hours or 7 hours, depending on terrain and wind. Anyway, that was, I just really became fascinated with this idea of how you could, just continue to, about the pace of it and how far you could take it, and that there was a whole world out there. And anyway, the next summer, I bought a one-way plane ticket to Anchorage, Alaska, and spent the whole summer with my bike and tent and all the same stuff, and just traveled around Alaska and the Yukon and some of the Northwest Territories, and then made my way south to Vancouver eventually by sort of end of summer, and then continued all the way across BC, Alberta, the prairies, and northern Ontario, over Lake Superior, back home to Toronto. And that was a 10,000 kilometer trip that took 4.5 months in total. And I just loved of course, the freedom of it, but I also loved the idea that you could just live this life that was so stripped back to its essentials, with a tent for shelter and a sleeping bag and clothes to stay warm, and with the option to make fires if you wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And
your legs.
And you've got
just to keep you going.
Your legs, a little camp stove, and you can just improvise your meals, just pick things up in shops and as you go, and yet, so life was kind of very small, very simple, but behind it is this backdrop of incredible landscape that is always spooling behind you as you're, moving along, day after day, week after week, just this constantly evolving landscape. And I just fell in love with it. And it was like, as with architecture school, it was a bit like tapping into just another one of these veins of gold, that just sustains you for a long time. And then I met Maggie. And come on, Maggie, let's do some of these together. And so we did a couple of short trips out in the Gaspé, and we did a trip from Vancouver to Calgary, and she enjoyed it. And it just continued to spiral. And I wanted to ride our bikes around the world, because why not? We didn't have real responsibilities at that point. I suppose we could have chosen to invest in our careers, like fully invest, but it seemed like we could take a pause, and no harm done, in spite of what some friends had told us. But it turned out that, Maggie did not want to ride her bike around the world. So we struck a compromise, and we would ride from from Inuvik in the Northwest Territories to the southern tip of South America. That was the compromise.
Yeah, just across the Americas.
And so we did that trip, and that was a 27,000 kilometer trip that took us 2.5 years.
Wow.
And
that was consistently 2.5 years. Like it wasn't broken up into stages where you'd come back and work.
We never came back.
Yeah.
No. We paused along the way and took some time off just to rest.
Yes.
Here and there. We took breaks in a whole bunch of different places. But no, we never turned around. We never came home. We were away for that full period.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We were often asked, was it dangerous? And it was never dangerous. We never would have done it if it felt dangerous. We were not thrill seekers at all. That's not what we got out of it. We were, just looking for an experience of landscape and culture. And it was hard, certainly, a lot of the time, but not dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was completely affirmative, in the sense that we were greeted with warm hospitality almost everywhere we went, particularly once we were out of Canada and the United States, where we were, a little bit more exotic, I suppose, to the local people. We were typically not anywhere near big cities. We weren't interested in that. And so we were just off the beaten trail most of the time, riding through terrain that, or parts of countries that don't get visitors from tourists. And, we'd arrive in some small village in the Andes in central Peru, and people are shocked. They're just shocked when they see you. Like these two with their Lycra shorts on and their bikes, like who are these people?
You just emerged from the forest on your bike. How did you get here? Actually, we started somewhere else.
But after the ice had broken, we would ask, where the market is, and like, is there anywhere we could put a tent anywhere, in our broken Spanish. And once the ice had broken a little bit, we could tell that they probably realized that we had worked very hard to get to their little piece of the world. And that just brought out the best in people, mostly,
Mm-hmm.
and they were anxious to share a little bit of their world with us. And we wanted to hear a little bit of our story. And, one instance that comes to mind, we were in Mexico, in a very small town in Mexico, way off the beaten path. And a lot of the people from the village came out to greet us, and they were so excited. And would we like to see the town telephone? And we said, sure, let's go see the town telephone, which was in somebody's house. And so we all went, and they showed us the phone, and we played along and got very excited how wonderful it was that they had this telephone. And would we like to call somebody? And, who are we going to call? So we politely said, maybe we're not going to call somebody. We don't know somebody. But we pulled out our maps, and, there'd always be this little kind of show and tell that would happen. We pulled out our maps of Mexico, and they asked if their town was on the map. And we looked and pointed. Yes, it was. We pointed to it, and everybody just got so excited. I think everyone understood what a map was, but they didn't understand how to read a map.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then somebody wanted to know if, their brother's town up the road was on the map, and we looked, and big chorus of excitement. And that was kind of the way it went most of the time. The details are always different, but that story happened, like the essentials of that story just happened over and over again.
And did you do another trip as well? I know you went across the Americas. Did you do a trip in Asia too, or in Europe?
Yep. Yep. There was another very long trip, not quite as long as the trip through the Americas, but the trip started just with me, starting in Western China. I flew into a city called Kunming, which is one of these cities that's way bigger than Toronto, but probably no one's ever heard of it because there's so many of them in
Right.
Western China.
Right.
And I cycled from Kunming up into Tibet, or that was the plan, and then to cross southern Tibet through the Himalayas, and then drop down into Nepal and India, and then from Rajasthan in India, I was going to fly to Myanmar, to Rangoon, and meet Maggie there. She would fly there, meet me there, and then we continued on together in Southeast Asia, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did the body hold up over the course of that trip? Because that's, I mean, you're talking serious elevation gains and losses, and different than the Americas.
Yeah. Tibet was hard. Cycling across Tibet was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done physically. I had altitude sickness a couple of times. The elevations are very, very high.
Yeah.
And, I coming from Western Tibet and sort of rolling gently up into the Himalayas allowed me to acclimatize a little bit, but still there were some big drops. You go down to the Yangtze and then down to the Selwyn River, down to the Yellow River, and then up again to, 4,500, 4,800 meters. And I would always get altitude sickness again after those big ascents.
Right.
And I caught pneumonia while I was in Tibet because I was a bit late arriving there, and winter came, and it was very cold. My water bottles would freeze in the night, and
Crazy.
But spectacular.
So you finished that trip, and in between the trip through Asia and the trip to the Americas, had you come back to work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where were you at that time?
At that time, where was I at that time? I you know what? I think I was back at Kohn Shnier for a while.
You were, okay.
It's a long time ago, Jonathan. So I
You know.
can't quite remember. Pretty sure I went back. I did go back to Kohn Shnier for a while.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you finished the trip through Asia.
Yeah.
And you came back.
Yes.
And then what did you do? What did the career path look like? Did you feel like you were fulfilled from seeing the world and culture standpoint, or did you still feel the itch? Because what I really find interesting right now is you described such a keen interest and intent in wanting to be immersed in architecture, but also the pull to go see the world. So I feel like that's a constant battle of wanting to do the work that you love, and then go put in the work to go see what you love.
Right. Well, that's an interesting observation or question. And, it's something that I've thought a good deal about over the years. What is the connection between this life of nomadic travel and the other life of designing buildings? And is there a line that you can draw between the two? And it's a little hard to talk about without it just sounding like hyperbole, but I do think that you can. When I was in first year architecture school, there was a project that we did called the Primitive Hut, and really interesting project. And the idea was the assignment rather, was to design a small rustic shelter without amenities in the middle of a wilderness landscape, strip everything else away, just a bare shelter. And beyond its utility, which is obvious, to keep you dry, keep you warm, beyond its utility. Safety, yeah. But beyond that, what kind of experiences, or what set of experiences could or should a structure like that provide its occupants, right? And, for example, a place of shelter, what shape might it have? Should it, should it envelop you in a certain way to enhance this feeling that you're protected, or that you're sheltered, or that you're, being shielded from the elements outside? And but maybe it also brings in the elements, or brings you close to those elements, so that you can, sit next to a thunderstorm and enjoy the power, the sublime power of that, while feeling very protected, with a fire and an enclosure of a certain shape, and so there's a certain experience there that you wouldn't get from just a utilitarian shelter. And maybe some other component of that would be the antithesis of that, which is getting up high to a place where you're very exposed, but able to survey the landscape around you. That I would say is a kind of like almost archetypal experience of wilderness landscape as well. Other questions like, how do you enter? What would be the best way? What would be the right way to enter that building? How would you illuminate that building? So it was a compelling project, and something I dwelled on a lot while we were traveling, because all of the qualities that we were asked to bring into the Primitive Hut project, we were experiencing every day. And when I got back from all of these travels, I did a project of my own initiative, just a speculative project, but one that was very passionate about. I called it Tomagami Wilderness Camp, and it was a version of the Primitive Hut, and kind of a personal manifesto that was an attempt to translate these experiences camping, the feeling of vulnerability balanced with shelter, an appreciation for just the humility that you feel when you're faced with the potential fury of the natural elements. And I hope that makes some sense. And so develop this, let's call it a primitive hut based on all of that. Now, not everybody wants to live in a primitive hut. I understand that, but a rustic cottage in Northern Ontario is a place that a lot of people would like to have and enjoy. And the line, or the leap rather, from primitive hut to that, you can imagine that without too much difficulty. Unfortunately, what you often see, and not from my talented colleagues out there, but from, just other sources, you often see cottages that look like they originate as homes in the city, or rather that's the starting point. And then they're dropped into a beautiful wilderness landscape, maybe with a few tweaks made. And they're meant to be sat inside, and you look out windows at some beautiful views, right? But the other place you could start when approaching a project like that is the primitive hut, and approach the idea of a rustic cottage from that starting point, which I think results in something more tactile, more immersive, and a more complete experience of your surroundings, right?
Less scale.
Yeah,
but just generally less
yes
building.
Yeah,
right.
Potentially
more of the need,
right. and with a focus on how you experience where you are. Yeah.
And so what led you to ultimately moving in the direction of wanting to start your own practice?
So the last thing that I was doing before I started Great Lake Studio, something I never in a million years thought I would get involved in or be interested in, but I was involved in transit design for a while. A friend of mine from school, a classmate who was leading the charge at, it was IBI Group at the time. They had just won a project for 10 underground stations in Tel Aviv. And would I like to, she called me up, and would I like to work on these with her and be the design lead? And I mean, I had never thought that that would appeal or that I could even do that. I didn't have, I didn't think I'd have the skills to do that. Pretty specialized work,
Yeah.
Underground buildings, underground transit buildings in particular. But I took that on, and it was a wonderful adventure for a while. Certainly forced me to develop some new skills that I didn't possess previously. I was leading teams of, there were hundreds of people working on that project on different continents. We had architects in Toronto, New York, and Tel Aviv, and I was leading all of them toward the end. One of my colleagues described her role. She was kind of doing the same thing. She described her role as an air traffic controller, And I mean, this is the normal trajectory of a career in architecture. You start off and you work with the skills you've got in an office. You're building models. You're, maybe drawing some plans, helping out with some graphics on proposals, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then you become a job captain, and you understand the project better. Your head is still in it fully, but you've got a few people helping you out, and then as you move up further, you become a manager. Now your head is not in the project so much anymore. You're not really touching a pencil anymore.
That's HR.
You're just looking after this group of people, making sure things roll along well. And so that I had arrived at that moment and realized that as fun as it was for a while, that it was not the thing that I really loved to do. And at that exact same moment, Maggie and I designed our own home for ourselves, which was a wonderfully refreshing contrast to all of that, a much more intimate scale to work at. And I had designed houses with Kohn Shnier, and it had been quite a while, and I really loved the idea again. We had a young son, talked a lot about our family life, our lifestyle. We wanted to bring a lot of our travels back, and kind of weave that into our home in the city.
Yeah.
And I just love the richness of it, the immediacy of it, and to be able to control the process a bit better, to be able to get involved in craft again. And that was when I started Great Lake Studio. And so the way my studio is set up at the moment, it's just me. And so, I look after every project. Everything's in my head. I know every detail, every corner. It's a little bit of a monastic work life, maybe not well suited to everybody, but it works okay for me. Maggie is my sounding board, thank God. Like when I get stuck with something, we talk, and we're always bouncing ideas off each other, and so that works really well. There's a downside too, of course, which is that I draw everything. I'm typically doing 3 projects at a time, like three houses, which is a lot of drawing.
Yeah.
In the past 6 years I've drawn, I mean, my God, I can't even tell you how many kitchens I've drawn, like hundreds of linear feet of kitchens. But it is mostly what I enjoy,
You also just said it's like you're drawing hundreds of feet of the heart, right? Isn't the kitchen?
That's right.
The kitchen is the heart of every single house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting that right is an important thing.
It is. It's a pleasure working on, houses are uniquely enjoyable in that you are, you're setting the stage for a family's lifestyle and memories, in small and occasionally profound ways. And, I love that idea. Really is such a privilege to imagine, many, many years of life unfolding inside one of my projects. And for kids too, I think, houses leave an indelible impression on kids. Like I still dream about my childhood home.
Right. So it's funny because, in the many conversations that I've had, I've never actually sat in the discussion and then thought about what it was like for me, as you're describing this, what it was like for me sitting at the counter and watching, my mom or my dad prepare something for one of our meals, or
Yep.
the siblings coming in and out of the kitchen, someone doing work at the kitchen counter, or having a snack, or just running in, opening a cupboard, grabbing something and leaving. And the functionality and how truly memorable those moments are in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm sitting here now, and if you're listening to this, like, you think about that for a second and what it was like. And when you take a pause for a sec to actually appreciate what you can create as literally lifelong memories for families in residential construction, it's a pretty special thing.
Yes, it is.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm absorbing that for a sec, because we build it, right? Like we build it, and you get this when you get to start to see that unfold, as the millwork arrives, when the flooring goes down, the millwork arrives, everything's been primed, all those specifications, all those conversations you've had with people, it all starts to like formulate in front of you, and now you can touch it. It's no longer the drawing; it's tangible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting way that you took me there.
Yeah, that's nice.
It really is, and the unification of that space for families. It's a really big thing. I'm sorry I'm harping on this, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to think about when you go over to someone's house, that the first place you're going to generally be is in the kitchen, in some way.
Family celebrations, birthdays, holidays, all kinds of, minor and major celebrations and small rituals all happening, and hopefully elevated by this backdrop that has been designed and built for them. And it's lovely. It has a lasting impact, on a family.
And you have the ability to draw upon experiences that you've had in other places of the world in some capacity, in some way, to bring into conceptual ideas for people, which is, I think, also widely unique. Yeah.
In some capacity, yeah. I mean, as an architect, every time you put pen down to paper, you're bringing your values and dispositions to the table with you, right? And that's why, when a client is selecting an architect, it's so important, obviously, to make sure that aesthetic values are aligned and they can look to the work for that. But it's equally important, I think, to make sure that you're working with someone who shares a certain set of values that are at least, compatible with the client, exactly, because you bring all that with you in every, sitting down for a few hours working through a set of plans. You're making dozens of judgments and decisions, all based on, your personal values and, dispositions.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're working, if there's a good chemistry between client and architect, then what the architect is naturally going to produce for you should ideally, resonate well for the client, or not if it's not working.
Mm-hmm. I think I'll say this: if you're listening to this episode and you're currently in school, or you are a young architect and you're debating and challenging yourself in your mind about what career path you're going to go down, what your career is going to look like, I would say to you this, and that is to go with an open mind, because you don't know what path and what opportunity will present itself along the way of your professional career. And perhaps it is something like taking a leave from work to be able to go and experience the world, to allow you to get a better sense of what your values are, and to root yourself in what your family will look like. Because there are those that go and they work and they work and they work and they work, and they don't necessarily get to enjoy what their work is allowing them to do. And then there are those that get a lot of enjoyment out of their work, but don't go after your life with the notion that you have direct control over all of it, and go out there and enjoy it, because you might end up sitting across from someone talking about your career, and you can realize that all the things that you've been able to do have afforded you to be able to have this incredible lifestyle.
Yeah.
That's I'm taking all of that away from our discussion, Rick.
Uh-huh. Well, it's a microcosm of that would be, if I think I understand what you're saying, clients will sometimes come to me and they will have a very clear idea about what they think they want.
Yeah.
They've thought this through, and this is what they want, and this is how they want to lay it out. And I say, okay, and then we start down a road. We start to go down that journey together, to have that journey. And if it's a good journey, and if there's good discovery along the way, then the place that you end up is nothing like the place you thought you were going to be when you first set out.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. And that is the sign of a good process, because you've really worked it through and thought it through and tried new things and discovered that, actually that works better for this particular little problem. And then that takes you over here further. And you understand what I mean by that? True of life too,
right?
I suppose.
I mean, I strongly agree. Look, my career path hasn't been so straight. So yes, I would agree with all you've just said.
Yeah.
I appreciate you taking time out of the day. What a great journey you just led us down of what your career has been like and your life has been like. I think that if people are fortunate to be able to work with you, for you to be able to draw upon all of your worldly experiences and the professional experiences that you've had to give them and provide them with a better understanding of what their needs are going to look like. This is a conversation I feel like we're going to need to continue.
Well, I need some kitchen help for sure. That's in the immediate short term, anyway.
I appreciate you taking the time, Rick. Thank you for joining today. And if you're not familiar with Great Lake Studio, please go on to Rick's website. You can check out his Instagram. It's really, truly beautiful work. Highly recommend it. If you're listening to the podcast, remember to take a look on Spotify and Apple. Give it a like, give us 5 stars so that way more people can be aware of it. Getting people to tell their stories has been such an enjoyable thing to be able to do in this stage of my career. So I appreciate your candor and your willingness to want to go and have a conversation about things that you may or may not have thought you would discuss today. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you so much. It was really lovely. Appreciate it.